This video is about books, but not all books. Books may be fiction or nonfiction. Nonfiction books may be popular or scholarly. Scholarly nonfiction may be in the form of monographs, essay collections, or other types such as reference works. This tutorial will discuss scholarly monographs and essay collections. We will look at their features, their structure, and how to distinguish between primary, secondary, and tertiary sources. We'll do this by looking at several different examples and discussing how they're similar along with how they're different. When we're done, you'll be in a position to approach an academic text with greater confidence. We'll start with this book by Peter Fletcher, World Musics in Context, a comprehensive survey of the world's major musical cultures. This book is a monograph, a book by a single author on a single topic. A monograph may also have multiple authors, but this book has only one. It is a tertiary monograph because it is a summary, in its own words, a survey of existing scholarship on the topic. A scholarly book may be thought of as having three sections: the front matter, the main body of the work, and the back matter. The front matter is the first section of a book and is generally the shortest. It serves to orient the reader to the book as a whole. It can be as simple as a single title page, or it can include multiple title pages, forewords, prefaces, tables of contents, lists of illustrations, guides to abbreviations, and so on. The front matter usually has page numbers in lowercase Roman numerals. The main body of the work is the longest part of the book, and it's what we mostly think of when we think of the book. It may be divided into chapters or independent essays by one or more authors. Often a scholarly text is divided into broad sections, each of which is in turn made up of several individual essays or chapters. The back matter is the last section of the book and generally contains sections that refer back to the main body of the work, providing commentary on or access to information found there. A work of fiction may have no back matter at all. A work of scholarly nonfiction may typically have notes, one or more appendices, bibliographies, indexes, glossaries, chronologies, or similar elements. There can be some variation in the distribution of elements between sections. In books published in France, for instance, the table of contents is typically part of the back matter, not the front matter. World Musics in Context has a well-developed front matter that includes acknowledgments, a table of contents, a 5-page list of plates, which is just an old-fashioned way of saying illustrations, a list of maps, because after all world is in the title, a foreword, and an introduction. This kind of foreword, by the way, is spelled F-O-R-E-W-O-R-D, not F-O-R-W-A-R-D. The foreword here is particularly long at 29 pages and divided into sections. It sets up the conceptual frames of reference for what is to follow and is written by an outside scholar, someone who is not the author of the book. The introduction is written by the book's author and is briefer, though at 16 pages it is still pretty substantial. It's more of a technical orientation to the book with information about terminology, methodology, and the book's structure. The acknowledgement section often focuses on thanking the author's family and friends for putting up with them while they were writing the book, but in some cases like this one it also lists the names and institutional affiliations of prominent experts whose insights were helpful to the author. If you are a serious student of the topic, you should not overlook this section as a possible resource for learning more. The main body of this work is divided into 5 sections on general themes, with each section containing 3 to 5 chapters on more specific topics. The text is well supplied with references, which take the form of footnotes. References in a book like this can be in the form of in-text citations or in the form of notes. When notes are used, they can take one of 3 forms: endnotes at the end of the book, endnotes at the end of each chapter, or footnotes at the bottom of the same page where the text refers to them. Of the 3 forms, footnotes are by far the most convenient to the reader. The back matter of this book consists of 3 elements: a bibliography, credits for illustrations, and an index. The bibliography at 21 pages is particularly well developed and would serve as an excellent jumping off point for further research on the topic of the book. It includes books, journal articles, and numerous citations to articles in the first edition of the New Grove Dictionary. The credits for illustrations are mostly a publishing formality. The index, a 15-page general index with names, topics, instruments, genres, foreign terms, and so on. Many entries have sub-entries listed under them. Africa Sub-Sahara has 10 sub-entries, for example. One sign that the index was prepared carefully is that many entries are listed in more than one place. Kabuki, for instance, occurs as an entry by itself, and also as a sub-entry under Japan. Harpsichord and Lute Music in 17th Century France by David Ledbetter is also a monograph, a single work on a single topic, also by a single author. But this is a secondary monograph. A secondary source is one that takes information or documents that are already known and subjects them to some kind of original discussion, interpretation, or commentary. In this case, the repertoire under discussion is well known to musicologists, but the author is attempting to argue in favor of a particular view concerning the influence of lute composers on keyboard composers. Since his argument breaks a certain amount of new ground, we cannot call it a summary of existing scholarship. Thus, it is not a tertiary monograph, but a secondary monograph. Also, you'll notice that the topic is much more narrowly defined than it is in the case of the tertiary source we just examined. This greater specificity of topic, while not always a dead giveaway, is nevertheless still a useful clue in distinguishing between a secondary and a tertiary source. The front matter of Ledbetter's book consists of a table of contents, a separate table of musical examples, a preface by the author of the book, a short note to the reader with a glossary, guide to abbreviations, and note on the system used to designate pitch, and an introduction, also by the author. The main body of the work consists of 3 chapters, with between 2 and 11 subsections within each chapter. These subsections are indexed by page number in the table of contents, which gives the reader easier access to specific key points in the author's argument. The back matter has somewhat more elements than Fletcher's book. First, we find the notes and references, 20 pages of them organized into sections according to chapter. Next, we see a 12-page bibliography of sources, divided into archival sources, both published and unpublished, plus separate sections for literature before 1800, representing sources contemporary with the subject matter, and since 1800, representing retrospective historiography on the topic. After the bibliography is a list of sources, which is essentially a second 6-page bibliography of printed and manuscript sources of music relevant to the topic. Appendix A is a concordance between lute sources and 2 important harpsichord sources. In other words, a list of pieces that can be found in versions for both harpsichord and lute, including details on where each version is found. Appendix B is a list of lute tunings, probably the most comprehensive list of lute tunings found anywhere in the literature. Finally, we come to the index, a 9-page general index of names, places, topics, and so on, with sub-entries for individual pieces under entries for their composers. Our last example of a monograph is the Old Checkbook or Book of Remembrance of the Chapel Royal from 1561 to 1744, edited by Edward Rimbaud. This work was originally published in 1872, and we have it in what is called a reprint edition, a type of edition that faithfully reproduces the contents of a previous edition, usually one that is out of print and out of copyright protection. This is a primary source monograph, an edited print of the original handwritten records of the Chapel Royal, the musical establishment of the Royal Court of England. It's an excellent source for basic information like this notice of Henry Purcell's appointment as royal organist to replace Edward Lowe in September 1682, including the fact that his appointment was made retroactive to July when he stepped in 3 days after Lowe's death. The front matter of this volume includes 2 introductions. The first is an introduction to the Da Capo reprint edition of 1966. Da Capo Press is a publisher that specializes in reprint editions of music-related texts. Then, along with the title page of the new edition, there is the title page of the original 1872 edition, along with Rimbaud's original introduction to that edition. There's also a table of contents. The main body of the work is divided into 18 sections, each of which represents the transcription of a different type of record or chronicle, with entries arranged chronologically within each section. If you didn't know this, you might search in vain in the wrong place for specific information. The back matter consists of notes and indexes. There are 61 small print pages of notes to all parts of the main body of the work, an unusually large amount of notes in the main source of commentary on the entries themselves. There follow two indexes, a 6-page index of names and a 2-page index of subjects and places. These indexes are both brief, but the existence of multiple indexes is notable in a book from the 19th century when many academic texts were not indexed at all. It is probably obvious that without at least this level of indexing, a work like this one would be a lot less valuable. So far, we've examined a tertiary monograph, a secondary monograph, and a primary monograph, looking at the front matter, the back matter, and the organization of the main body. We've seen elements like forewords, introductions, and indexes, but not always in the same arrangement. Now let's look at some essay collections. Essay is a pretty vague word that can mean a lot of things in a lot of different contexts. An essay could be a book in itself. For our purposes, we're talking about pieces of writing roughly the length of a book chapter or an article in a journal, not that that is very specific, of course, which are formal pieces of scholarly argument that can stand independently. These are generally collected into books with an editor or editors over the volume as a whole. The essays in a collection can be by the same author or by different authors. They may have been commissioned especially for the collection under examination, or they may have all been published previously in a variety of journals and other venues. There is no easy way to search the library catalog for essays. The works we will examine are not identified as essay collections by their cataloging. If you are looking specifically for collections of essays, you might try searching for a title containing the word essays. You can also look for the word Festschrift or the phrase Liber Amicorum, both of which refer to a volume of essays in celebration of a noted living scholar, or Gedenkschrift, which is a volume of essays in honor of a scholar no longer living. The Cambridge Companion series is also made up exclusively of collections of essays. None of these methods, however, will reliably locate all or even most collections of essays on a topic. Volume 4 of the New Oxford History of Music, titled The Age of Humanism 1540 to 1630, is an example of a collection of essays by different authors commissioned specifically for the volume at hand. It does not have a single editor, but rather an editorial board. In such a case, it is appropriate to list the publisher as the author of the work. This is a tertiary collection made up of essays created as summaries of particular historical topics, as are all 11 essays in the larger collection of which it forms a part, which are intended to go together to create a history text. Published in 1968, it was meant to replace the earlier Oxford History of Music published between 1901 and 1905. The front matter of this volume is modest but fairly complete. It has a general introduction printed in all 11 volumes of the series, then the table of contents, followed by a separate table of illustrations, then a separate introduction to this volume, which sets the historical context for the essays that follow. One thing is missing. The text is liberally furnished with musical examples, but there is no table of these. The main body of this collection is made up of 15 separate essays, each on a particular topic within the broad subject area of the book. Most of the essays are by a single author. One of them is revised by a second author. One of the essays is written in sections by 5 different authors. The very detailed table of contents indexes subsections within each essay, giving the reader quicker access to specific discussions within each topic. Here the notes are in the form of footnotes on each page. The back matter of the collection is made up of a bibliography, a list of contents of a set of recordings, and an index. The bibliography is 63 pages long and extremely comprehensive, organized into sections corresponding to each essay. Essentially, it is 15 separate bibliographies, each one prepared by the author of the essay it's associated with. However, some editorial consistency has been imposed on these bibliographies since each one is divided into 2 subsections. The first for musical sources, and the second for books and articles. Here is where you would look for the secondary literature that went into the preparation of this tertiary source. The next part of the back matter is a key to the recordings on a set of vinyl LP records that was produced to accompany the book. This was a major technical and marketing innovation in its time. The final part is the index, containing names, topics, and so on. Like the bibliography, the index is unusually long and detailed, running to 66 pages. It is a little confusing to use in one way because some compositions are indexed by title alphabetically as main entries, while others are indexed by title as sub-entries under the main entries for their composers. This does illustrate the importance of understanding the organization of an index before we try to use it to find information. A different type of essay collection is represented by Music and the Culture of the Renaissance and Other Essays by Edward Lewinsky. All of the essays in this 2-volume book are by Lewinsky and were originally published elsewhere, but have been collected and edited by another scholar for republication. This is a work of secondary scholarship, as the essays all, or at least mostly, discuss sources already known to scholars but cast them in the light of Lewinsky's particular insight. The front matter of this work includes a table of contents, a table of illustrations, plus 2 forewords, and 1 introduction. The table of contents lists large sections and individual essays without mapping subsections of essays as some do. The table of contents in the first volume includes contents of both volumes, while the one in the second volume shows only the contents of the second volume. The same goes for the tables of illustrations in the 2 volumes. Like the previous work, there is no table of the numerous musical examples. The first foreword is a longer one by Howard Mayer Brown, and the second a shorter one by Ellen T. Harris, 2 scholars who have left an important mark on musicology. Both are focused on Lewinsky and his contributions to musical scholarship. The introduction by Bonnie Blackburn also discusses Lewinsky, but is focused more narrowly on the process of collecting and editing the essays in the collection. Taken together, they provide a variety of perspectives on the material that follows. The main body of the work is divided into 8 large sections with between 3 and 8 individual essays in each section. There are a great quantity of notes, all of which are in the form of footnotes. The back matter of the volume consists of 2 indexes, an index of manuscripts cited and a general index of names, titles, and everything else. The general index is about 20 pages, but given the large format of the book, it's perhaps comparable to a 40-page index in most other volumes. One feature of the organization of the index is that titles of compositions are listed under main entries for composers, but without page numbers. The reader is meant to identify the title of a piece under the composer entry and then look up the page reference under separate entries for each composition. Oliver Strunk's Source Readings in Music History from Classical Antiquity through the Romantic Era, the last book we'll look at, is a less common but very important type of collection. The essays and excerpts by various authors in this collection may have been written first for many different purposes, including criticism or instruction, but are presented here as examples of discourse from specific historical periods as testimony to the thoughts and ideas of people in their own times. Organized as an essay collection, it is a work of primary source material. Works of this type very often have the term source readings in their title. The front matter here consists of a dedication, acknowledgments, a guide to abbreviations, a table of contents, and a foreword. Note that the table of contents does not show any of the front matter or back matter. You have to find this on your own. The foreword is relatively short at only 7 pages, and it focuses on principles of selection, editing practice, and methodology. The main body of this work is divided into 18 sections representing historical periods or contexts, with from 2 to 5 readings within each section by authors from Plato to Wagner. There are 87 readings in all. Each reading is preceded by a capsule summary of the author, and only a small handful of authors are represented by more than one reading. The index is a general index of only 14 pages. It includes names, places, a few topics. There are sub-entries under some main entries, but in all cases they are sub-entries for compositions under a main entry for a composer. Note that this reflects the primacy accorded to individual works as embodiments of musical worth in the traditional historiography. For example, there is no index entry for second practice, even though it is mentioned repeatedly in connection with Monteverdi. We conclude this tour through the landscape of scholarly monographs and essay collections by noting that we have examined a variety of types of material. Monographs by a single author containing primary, secondary, or tertiary source material, and essay collections by a single or multiple authors, either commissioned for the volume at hand or collected retrospectively, and also containing primary, secondary, or tertiary source material. Some works have a single general index, while some have multiple indexes. Some tables of contents are brief, while others are highly detailed. Some have important information in notes or appendices in the back matter, while some present most of their information in the main body of the work. Some have forewords or introductions that allow us to more efficiently access what the book has to offer. Scholarly texts are not always easy to read, but if you keep these things in mind when you engage them, you can get more out of them, sometimes with less trouble.